Oh, look at the time. Look at the clock. Look at the calendar. It's unprecedented here on Legal AF. It's the only place to be these days. This is where we need to hang out. This is where we need to commune, have fellowship, speak truth to each other with Dina Sayegh and Michael Popok. This show is like no other on YouTube. And if you want to see this content and more of it, now is the time to hit the subscribe button. Yes, it's a subscribe drive as we try to get to 1 million as fast as we can of subscribers, because it helps this kind of content, brings on amazing contributors like Dina Sayegh. We got about a dozen others here on the channel, some new ones that we're going to be announcing this week alone. Sydney Blumenthal is going to be exclusively on Legal AF doing YouTube videos, as is Dr. Sean Wilentz, a historian. You guys are going to love the stuff we're doing. Let's kick it off with a new episode of Unprecedented about all things United States Supreme Court. And let's jump in. So everybody knows already, because it happened last Saturday, that at 1 a.m., 12:51 a.m. to be precise, the United States Supreme Court did something they don't generally do. They issued an order that didn't relate to somebody like facing the death penalty. And 9 justices got together, and 7 of them said to Donald Trump, stop, not like stop Vladimir, stop Putin, but which seems to be Donald Trump's foreign policy. But it was like, just stop. Don't deport anybody. Don't. Let's figure out what notice and due process you gave, what you're supposed to give under the Fifth Amendment. We don't trust you is sort of the underlying current of this 1 a.m. order. And it seems to have had an impact on the Trump administration in some positions they've been taking with the Abrego Garcia case. And now we got a brand new, just to touch on it, brand new class action filed by the American Civil Liberties Union. I just did a hot take on it here for Legal AF, in which they're going, all right, 1 a.m. order, we see you. We see what you're all about. What about the 137 people that got shipped off to El Salvador without all of that? Why is it just Abrego Garcia that gets to come home, or has an order that Trump has to facilitate his removal and release from an El Salvadorian prison? What about our other 137 other clients? Remember, we always said those poor bastards. I'm not making comments about their criminal status. I'm just saying they didn't get notice in due process. What about them?
Yeah.
That's what that case is. So walk the audience through sort of what's happened, like the ripple effect of that decision on the heels of the Fourth Circuit's decision written by Judge Wilkinson, which was excoriating of Donald Trump 2 days earlier. Boom, boom, and then where we are now. Just shows you how the Supreme Court does, and then Donald Trump has to react.
Absolutely. And it was interesting because our last episode, we talked about how Trump was taunting the Supreme Court, right? And it was interesting also in your intro right now where you said it wasn't facing the death penalty, but it really is, isn't it? These people are being sent to this concentration camp in El Salvador, never to be released again. And Trump made that so clear by saying, I can't get this person out again, right? So the Supreme Court knew if you were going to have due process, you'd have to stop the planes. And they were effectively giving these people a death sentence. Trump had admitted that. And before we go into it too much, I just want to briefly talk about Alito's dissent. He was the 2, there's 7. It was a 7-2 decision. Alito and Thomas were the only ones.
Came out a few days later. Sure, tell the audience.
Came out a few days later because it's interesting. He calls it unprecedented. I think he's been listening to us. But it was hard
to Sam Alito.
Yeah, thank you. Appreciate the support. We've been calling the Supreme Court unprecedented for a very different reason. But he, it's nothing substantive. He doesn't say anything about it. Like, they actually don't deserve due process. It's all, this isn't the right jurisdiction to file. We should be getting briefed first. I mean, these planes are going to take off.
What's the rush? Yeah, they're in their upright locked position, these guys.
Yeah. And these are his arguments. They were almost laughable. The fact that he thought that they were acting too quickly. That was essentially his argument, that they were acting too quickly. And we know what happens when those planes take off. he says, when the court rule rushed to enter its order, it was a rush to enter its order. The Court of Appeals was considering the issue of emergency relief, and we were informed that a decision would be forthcoming. This court, however, refused to wait, right? This is what he's so upset about.
By the way, to complete the thought, the Fifth Circuit denied it. So now we're standing on ceremony about timing and procedure.
Exactly. Yeah. This is like effectively a death penalty for these people, and you're standing on procedure and timing, and Alito with a straight face tries to act like this is a normal situation, and they have the luxury of time, and they're acting with a good partner like Trump, who's going to actually care about things like jurisdiction procedure.
Come on, Dina, you're not being fair. Remember the last time a president sent people without due process to a foreign country's jail? Remember what happened then? No, it never happened.
No, exactly.
And it's never going to happen once Trump's out of office.
I know, but that's not what he finds unprecedented. He finds a 1 a.m. ruling somehow having gone beyond the capacity of the Supreme Court. Like, thank goodness they acted quickly for once. So he just really talks about with a straight face how they shouldn't be acting in such an imminent fashion, which, we all know what happens. So that's where we are. It's just
but wait, before you leave, even he says the last line or two. He says the judiciary has to play by the rules, but so does the executive branch, who needs to comply with our commands. So even he, Alito, threw a little Trump. Don't do it. Don't do it. You're heading, this is not a fight you can win politically or legally. Don't do it. And then we had a whole change in the Abrego Garcia case off of that, because right after that, because I think the Trump administration wasn't expecting the 1-2 punch of Judge Wilkinson and the 7-2 decision against them on the heels of the 9-0 decision against them in the Abrego Garcia case. And they came back to Abrego Garcia. And they told the opposing lawyers, we are currently working on diplomatic channels to try to get Abrego Garcia back. And the two parties filed something that after the judge looked at it, Zinnis, she said, I'm going to give you guys another week and put a cloak over the process, right? No more, you don't have to send me reports every day. You don't have to do discovery. You got till the 30th. I did a hot take on this. I think she's cloaked this to allow for diplomacy. I'm not saying she's negotiating to get back, but they've told her it's delicate right now. We're working on it. We don't, and even the Abrego Garcia lawyers, the ACLU is like, we don't need to have them daily report. We just need them to do the things they've represented that they're doing. And she's probably like, all right, on that representation, which has been sealed. So you see how Donald Trump has taken it to the limit. But right on the edge, he's started to walk back a little bit.
And so many people in their comments on, when we talk about the Supreme Court in general, is like, what does it matter? They can't force him to comply. But he did comply. He did not send those planes. And I think actually a big part of that was just what happened with Judge Boasberg, how he said there was probable cause to have.
That's a good point.
Criminal contempt. And those officials know it's not going to be Trump that goes in front of a court with a probable cause with a criminal contempt. It's going to be the lower level officials, as it always is with Trump. And so you don't even know, was there a discussion at some level of what to do about it? But with that going on at the same time, are you really going to be the official to give the go order after a Supreme Court says
that's
that?
a very good
you're
missing piece.
Into court.
Yeah, that's a very good missing piece that you mentioned about it's, if you do the timeline, right, it's criminal contempt, even though stayed by the intermediary appellate court, Wilkinson, Fourth Circuit, then Supreme Court, 1 a.m. And now we've got we got a sea change. It's not stopping their political rhetoric for cheap political gain out here, but in the courtroom and in the courthouses, we're starting to see, because even though we don't want to see how far Donald Trump will go, Donald Trump and the people around him don't want to find out what would happen if they did disobey the United States Supreme Court. Like who knocks on their door with a sidearm. I don't think they want to find that out.
Right. They don't
You
want to
know?
find that out. And maybe Trump would be willing to, but you have to expect some career officials there also to be willing to. And that might be the stopgap, at least for now.
And the polling keeps him
Yeah,
reined in,
the
because his
truth.
poll numbers, when Fox News has to run a piece that Donald Trump then attacks that says only 44% of Americans approve Donald Trump, and it's been a 7-point drop in the last month. And he's a loser favorability, unfavorability rating right down the line, even on immigration. And separate polling in the same week that said that the majority of America, vast majority, would want to have him impeached and removed if he disobeyed the United States Supreme Court. So he overplayed his hand about people's disrespect for the Supreme Court.
Yeah.
And they realized that that is where the rubber meets the road for people in our, in our patriotism. And so I think all of those things coming in made him unhappy. The economy being in the shitter, him being told he's causing a recession. He switched gears there. He went hog wild to attack judges and the Supreme Court and do things that were unprecedented. And now I got a reverse course here. It's the same guy, same erratic person that's controlled by whoever speaks to him last, what the polls say, what cable news show he's watching. This is how he runs a government. There's no way to run a baseball team, that's for sure. Let's move on to some fun new things. So what do you want to talk about next?
Oh, so many things to talk about. We could talk about a few of the petitions to the court and then circle back to the oral argument this last week. Yeah. Two very interesting petitions. One has to do, the Trump administration is effectively asking the court to allow their executive order banning transgender members from serving in the military, to take it. We don't yet know whether or not the Supreme Court is going to take it. Their argument is that it's actually an interesting argument because we have discrimination laws, right, around gender. And in fact, Gorsuch wrote the opinion saying that discrimination against sex includes transgender people in the workplace under Title VII, right? So here you have, if you're going to be banning people because they're transgender, you could very likely get in the crosshairs. That was the Bostock opinion. You can get in the crosshairs of these anti-discrimination laws. But they are arguing, the government is arguing, that gender dysphoria is a medical condition, and under a medical condition, the military can ban them as they would with other medical conditions. The review needs to only be rational, and the army or the military would have a rational basis for it, and it's not a matter of discrimination. So it'll be interesting to see if the court, one, takes it on, and two, how they handle whether or not they're willing to create it, say, ignore the idea that this is really about discrimination, and pretend it is about this being a medical condition. But that's the question that the Trump is asking the court. Do you think that they're going to take it, Popok?
Yes. Yeah.
Because they want to
rule in Donald Trump's favor.
Yeah. What about Gorsuch? He seems to be the one person who, he was helpful with Bostock.
All right. So so walk me through the angle that you think the Supreme Court isn't going to take it to. Let's play devil's advocate. Tell me your position.
Yeah. It's a tough one. On the one hand, it's going to be hard for the government to prove that this is show that this is some sort of medical condition that interferes with somebody serving in the military, because they have a transgender commander who's served for years, arguing that the military actually has spent $20 million training her. It's clearly competent. They've invested in her. And so that there is not an argument that somehow she's medically incapable of serving it. So it's going to be a leap for them to at least get rational review from the Supreme Court. And that might be let's say, the saving grace for those people who think somebody who's transgender should be able to serve in the military.
Yeah, the problem is, I read part of what John Sauer wrote on behalf of the government, and they're like, well, in 2017, you backed it. They allowed the transgender ban.
Hmm.
It was a slightly different composition, but not that much. But you're right. I guess the question is if it's gotten more right wing. I just don't
Yeah.
see Amy Coney Barrett. I think that all the judges that have handled this case properly have found that it's motivated by animus and prejudice against a group of people with no other justification, and they should let the ban. They should overturn the ban or let these blocks stay in place. But what was their thinking in 2017 when they allowed it? Esprit de corps. I mean, I don't know. I don't want them to, but
Yeah.
and in the meantime, while that's going on, Pam Bondi ramps up guidance to the Department of Justice prosecutors about gender affirming care. I mean, it's just
scary.
Sometimes I have to
Scary
be.
time.
I have to be frank. Since I wake up, if I just read the headlines, I don't know what country I'm in.
Yeah, no, it's
I'm
true.
like, is this what day? What day is? Where are we?
I know. It is pretty.
The sooner we get these dangerous clowns out of the White House and the Department of Justice and start cleaning up, the better. And we got to start sending signals as we're doing, in the midterms. It's just
Absolutely.
if we wake up the day after the midterms and it's not a slaughter for the Republicans, then we here on Legal AF and the Midas Touch Network have done something terribly, terribly wrong.
Absolutely.
That's the way to send people. How do we control him? How do we rein him in? Slaughter him at the midterms.
Yeah. And you know what? You can plug into your local Dem clubs or go online. People are already sending postcards to get people registered to vote. This stuff happens early. Activists do not wait to the weeks leading up to the election to make a difference. So, and then the next petition to the Supreme Court has to do with guns. So in Minnesota, they passed a law saying that 18 to 20-year-olds cannot have a concealed weapon permit. Seems very reasonable. And the circuit court there, the Eighth Circuit there, said that it was unconstitutional because of the Supreme Court case that says you have to have any gun regulation based in history, and they found there was no historic precedent for it. The Supreme Court declined to take that case, which means the Eighth Circuit ruling stands, which means in Minnesota, 18 to 20-year-olds can carry a concealed permit. Now, the interesting thing here is there is a split in the circuits because in the 11th Circuit over in Florida, there was a different outcome. It was a very similar situation where there was banning the right to bear arms, again, with a younger set, the 18 to 20. And there, the 11th Circuit found that the ban was legal. And interestingly enough, they found historic precedent. And this is why it's so crazy to look at history. First of all, we are living in a completely different time than they were hundreds of years ago. But even if you're trying to look at historical precedent, so 11th Circuit said, well, under the Constitution, at the time, under that age, 20, they were considered minors and they weren't allowed to enter into contracts. So if you're looking at history, then they shouldn't also be allowed to carry arms. I mean, you can almost find any piece of history to justify your argument. So this is why this is a really silly thing. And it shows at the time that this came out, we all were arguing how unworkable of a standard it is. The Supreme Court really always tries to issue a precedent that's workable so you don't get this confusion around circuits, because people, frankly, shouldn't be confused about their constitutional rights. But when they said it has to be tied to history and then they didn't give guidance, now you're left with the 8th Circuit not allowing it, the 11th Circuit allowing it. It's possible the 11th Circuit one might go up to the Supreme Court. But at some point, they need to resolve this, because right now, you have completely different constitutional rights depending on where you live as it respects to a minor with guns.
Unfortunately, I don't think we're going to like the way they're going to resolve it.
I know.
I think they're going to resolve it as old-timey times. 18-year-olds had guns, and they were full-blown adults. And you can't put any limitation on them or treat them any differently. And I mean, they're already okay with the one out of Texas with right? Is that the 18? It's not the Texas one that we're talking about, right? No.
I think it was out of Florida, I thought, the
Right,
11th Circuit
right.
one.
But,
Yeah.
but they already affirmed Texas and struck down one in Texas a year or so ago that was very, very similar to this. I
Mm.
just don't think, they based on their rulings in the last few years on the Second Amendment and the way they interpret it, and trying to find a historical antecedent in order to support any type of regulation, despite the fact that a well-regulated militia is right in the Second Amendment. Um,
I know.
I just
Right.
don't think they sort of were okay with banning them from churches and public places,
Hmm.
certain type of restricted areas.
Hmm.
Sort of. I mean, it was borderline. It was almost touch and go there for a minute in terms of the votes, but they just don't see it. They just don't see the need. And Alito will go off about, oh, home protection. Oh, protecting yourself,
Hmm.
very important. I'm like, oh my God, here we go.
Hmm.
So there's that.
I know.
That to look forward to. May 15th,
Right.
right? We got the big, and we're going
Hmm.
to do it right here
Yeah.
on Legal AF, the May 15th. We'll remind everybody. I think if you're around, you're going to do something with me about it.
It's on my books. I'm going
All
to
right.
try to analyze it
Good.
live, give
Good.
people can follow along and
Yeah, good.
yeah.
Oral argument about birthright citizenship, but not really about the fundamentals of birthright citizenship, are really about the nationwide injunctions
Mm.
being used in the toolbox. It's interesting. It's not really about birth. It is. We call it the birthright citizenship argument,
Mhm.
but that's not what the appeal is about. The appeal is about whether it should have been blocked nationally. I mean, if you can't talk about your example of people not understanding their gun rights from state to state. How about their citizenship? Oh,
Gosh.
you were born in Jersey? Oh, then you're good. Oh, you were born in Texas? Oh, I'm sorry. Here's the door.
Yep.
Come on. I mean,
Oh,
seriously?
and talk about inefficiency that Doge is supposed to handle. Could you
Oh, yeah.
imagine having 50 different rules regarding citizenship? So, yes,
Yeah. Yeah.
that's
So,
going to be a very important hearing for sure because they didn't take up the injunction issue in January, even though the Biden
yeah.
administration at the time asked them to. So that's going to be a hard one for them to resolve.
Yeah. Agreed. You want to move on and you want to do the parental consent abortion petition?
Yes. Okay. So basically, this is another interesting one eh, in Montana. And so Montana has for years always had very strong pro choice rights. And they passed a constitutional amendment enshrining that right to an abortion. And there, the parents are saying that if you so they also have a law on the books that I think under 16 you have to get parental rights, but they're saying really these parents are saying under 18 you have to be not only notify the parents because that was kind of how it was. You either had to notify the parent or but they really want consent so the parent can block that abortion. And the issue there, the Montana Supreme Court said no, you cannot require consent from the parents because we have a constitutional right. These minors have a constitutional right. And the parents there are saying, well, the Supreme Court has said that as parents, we have the right to over our children's medical issues. And the Montana Supreme Court said, yes, that's true, but that has to do with government interference with your children's medical issues. Like the government can't say that your child maybe needs something or doesn't need something, like the parent has the right to decide that. But in this case, it's that minor themselves that is deciding it. And so that parental right doesn't trump that minor's constitutional right. So that's the issue. And so Montana is asking the Supreme Court to essentially, or not Montana, it's actually the parents are asking the Supreme Court to overturn that Montana Supreme Court that protected that minor's right to an abortion.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know why the Supreme Court wants to get involved with the rights that are allowed by
Mm-hmm.
the Montana Supreme Court in the Montana Constitution. But it's not great that they haven't decided whether to take it up yet, right?
I don't think so.
No. So I'm hoping
Yeah.
they deny the petition and they should, based on We've been
Mhm.
told it's a state's issue.
States here. Exactly.
Leave it. Everyone's like, which is code word for we're going to rip away your U.S. constitutional
Mhm.
right to choose as a woman, and we're going to leave it to the states, which means we're going to have 23 red states or whatever be
Mhm.
against you, but and against women's rights. But in a state like Montana, where they did find that there is a right to choose, and these are the limits of it, and a teenager doesn't have to get parental consent or whatever it's going to
Mhm.
be. They should really leave that to the
Mhm.
states if they're being honest and consistent from a jurisprudential standpoint. Um, but we'll follow it. Anytime we see
Mhm.
one of these petitions being lobbed in, I mean, look, we know what Donald Trump is doing at the court system and every place else. It is, I think he's referred to it, or his people have referred to it internally, and it's leaked out because this is a very leaky administration, as flood the zone. Speaking of leaks, we're flooding the zone. So all at once, they attacked universities and
Mhm.
law firms and law schools and media and judges and federal worker slashing and international aid and Ukraine all at once to try to overwhelm the opponents. But
Mhm.
we've had time to regroup now. It's been
Mhm.
90 days. And
Yeah.
the civil liberties groups, the American Civil
They're
Liberties Union,
amazing.
they were ready
Yeah.
6 months before the election because they saw Biden, sort of not doing well, and they had to be ready.
Mhm.
So that's why they were able to file lawsuits within hours of bad things happening because they got the suits already drafted and sitting on their servers.
If you're not a card-carrying member of the ACLU yet, yeah, me too.
I
I
am.
mean, they're impressive, and that takes a lot of money,
Yeah,
frankly.
I
That's a
freak out
lot of
most of my
lawsuits.
I freak out most of my friends because I'm a card carrying member of the American Civil Liberties Union, but I also have a concealed weapons permit.
Okay. Yeah. Well, you're in
They're like,
Florida.
what? Popok, what are you? Like, yeah, you're not gonna be able to figure me out. I just don't have an AK-47.
Yes. Right. Yes.
So yeah, all right. Well, listen, these are the things we need, and it's going to be, as you and I predicted, only half
Mhm.
jokingly.
Mhm.
Cancel your summer vacations.
Yeah.
Some Supreme Court. They used to go away. After
Mhm.
they dropped their last opinion,
Yeah.
which is, we're gonna. That's the other thing. We're coming into opinion season.
Mhm.
This is right. This is end of
Yeah.
April. We're going to start seeing a lot of
Mhm.
opinions to close out the term in May.
Oh,
And you
absolutely.
you and I are going to have to
Absolutely.
do hot
Right.
takes on a lot of them.
No,
Rather,
for sure.
you're right. Yeah, it's going to be like every day. There's going to be two or three. You and I are going to have. We're waiting on like 20 or 30
Mhm.
opinions. Then that's on top of the emergency applications that have to be
Mhm.
briefed and ruled upon. So you know, listen, I don't think they don't have to get together and be on the bench. They can do this remotely, but
Yeah.
a lot of them are going away. They go to like Europe for 6 weeks and they go,
Mhm.
they all get all expense paid trips about the law and they write books, but they're going to have to come back because they're going to be getting these circulated petitions while they're away and they're going to have to
Oh,
make rulings.
absolutely.
But Donald Trump is
Absolutely.
going to try to take advantage of that
Yeah.
because
No,
the
yeah.
advantage for him that he's pressing
Mhm.
of the emergency application docket, shadow docket route, is that it leaves no time for reflection. It leaves no time for caucusing. It leaves no
Mhm.
time for lobbying among the Supreme Court justice, among each other to reach a consensus conclusion and to flip and turn votes. That's what
Mhm.
really happens when you read all the books that you and I have read that are required reading in law school, like the Brethren, going back to the 70s and 80s. That's what goes on behind the scenes. And that's how you fight for the hearts and minds of Amy Coney Barrett and Roberts. And you can
Mhm.
flip a vote hopefully. But you need time and you need a
Yes.
process. And shadow docket doesn't allow for that. It
No.
doesn't allow for any face to face with some of these people. Will be like, fill in the blank, Justice. Let's take a
Mhm.
walk and have a cup of
Mhm.
coffee. A lot of things happen during
Mhm.
this deliberative process, but it's missing, and that's what Trump's banking on. He's banking on they go into their ideological reflexive corners on issues, and then he only has to fight for one of two, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
Because Alito, Thomas, Kavanaugh, and Gorsuch are going to go off to the right quick on an
Mhm.
emergency application, and Jackson, Kagan, and Sotomayor they go left, and who's in the middle? Roberts and Amy Coney Barrett. And if you're on the right, you only need one of the two. So he figured out early on this is the way to split the atom
Mm-hmm.
on things that matter. We've never had, when you and I went to law school, anybody went to law school, the cases that fill up our book on constitutional law, or however the tablet today, I guess, is filled with cases, and they're 99.9% of them are from the regular docket, the main a brief, 3 briefs, an oral argument, and a lot of deliberation. And
Mm-hmm.
that's how you make precedent, not this thing.
No,
These
it's true.
drive-by rulings.
It's true.
And that's all we're talking about, you and
Yeah.
I. We're like exhausted from these drive-by rulings, right?
Yeah. And like you said, they don't give us enough, right, to even be able to justify their own legal opinions. And we
Exactly.
did have
Or to
two,
guide the trial judges.
yeah, we did have 2 oral arguments this week.
Okay, why don't
Do
you
you want me
touch
to
on
give
that?
a quick recap? Because this is where
Yes,
we did actually have a full-fleshed oral argument. One
yes.
had to do with the ACA Preventative Task Force. We previewed both of these last week. And that one, it looks like the Supreme Court is going to allow the Preventative Task Force to continue to do its job.
What does that mean?
So
For people
basically,
just joining this new, what
yes.
does
So
that mean?
essentially the argument was that the members of the board, the task force board, they argued were principal officers that needed to be appointed and confirmed by the Senate. Otherwise, it would be a violation of the appointments clause. And the government argument was, no, they are inferior officers because they have the Secretary of Human Health and Services has oversight. They're not independent. Essentially, what the groups, it was an extreme Christian group, was trying to stop them from giving preventative HIV care because they said it, quote, encouraged homosexuality. This is a case in 2025. It's crazy. But that was their argument. Supreme Court justices, pretty much across the majority of them, did not buy that argument. And I thought Justice Kagan kind of said something funny. It's like the Supreme Court humor, right? Every once in a while, they kind of say something funny, which is, we're not, she's like, usually we destroy independent agencies. We don't create them, which was funny. And kind of like a little
Okay.
preview of what they're
Yeah.
being asked to do with Trump. But they, even the more conservative justices like Kavanaugh or whatever was like, Congress knows how to write this if they want to create an independent agency, and they didn't. So we're not going to give them more power than Congress
Yes.
did.
Right.
Yeah.
And it's another example of like versions of the major issues doctrine, which, we're not going to unless if it's something major, we presume Congress knows how to put it in writing. And
Right.
if they're not going to put it in writing, we're not going to imply it from
Yeah.
something else. And that's the other exit ramp that the Supreme Court justices use. Okay. And what's the other one?
So the other one has to do with the school curriculum that
Is this Puppy Parade?
Yes.
Oh,
This is
hold on.
Puppy Parade.
Let me set up straight. Go ahead. What happened with Puppy Parade?
So the argument there had to do with the parents who these books were showing same-sex marriage. And they said this was a violation of their freedom to exercise religion because there was no opt-out. And the opt-out was the central argument from all sides. There seem to be enough justices that the Supreme Court is going to probably side in favor of the parents in some way. Shocker. Yes.
Puppy Parade saved.
See you. But they themselves were having a hard time figuring out how to do it, because you can say evolution is a violation of some people's freedom of religion. Like how broad are you going to want to go? Are schools going to have to literally notify parents for every single thing? I mean, they did talk a lot about how in health class, when they talk about how a baby is made, parents get notified. It's in elementary school that this talk happens. Parents get notified. They can opt out. So the parents were kind of kept trying to tie it to that. And the Supreme Court justices were kind of like, having a hard time coming up with a rule. The Supreme Court, again, always wants to come up with a workable rule. Justice Gorsuch may end up writing the majority in this because he seemed to maybe find a rule that was so narrow to maybe, he said this, right? Like the school board in this case talked about their intention behind this book, that they wanted to sway minds. They wanted the
Oh,
children to be more inclusive. Like their intention was to, it wasn't just a book that they were happened to read. There was an intention behind it. And so Gorsuch kind of pointed out, like, maybe when there are instances where the school board has an intention like that, then they have to have an opt-out. The other argument that was thrown around by some of them was when it has to do with sexuality in particular, which maybe ties to the health class, then the parents have to opt out. But we're going to see the Supreme Court requiring the schools to provide opt-out. And then the only question is, how narrow is this? I mean, on the one hand, you can argue if you're somebody living in Oklahoma, you don't really want you to be the school. I mean, the school there seems to be getting super extreme in terms of the religion.
oh yeah.
You would want an opt out if the reverse is happening. They're talking
Yeah,
about
of
how
course.
bad same-sex marriage is. So, so to some extent, because we are in this crazy time, if you are, let's say, a blue dot in a red state, you might want some opt-outs too. But it's going to be interesting. That's going to be the dance that they do there, is how narrowly, and they're going to try to do it as narrowly as
Could you
possible.
imagine? Could you imagine how the current composition of the United States Supreme Court would handle the cases from like 40 years ago about creationism being taught in schools alongside evolution?
Yeah.
When you mentioned evolution, I was like, because there was a whole big battle. We don't monopolize all of the battles that have battles every decade about teaching something in a school system.
Yeah.
And there was all the religious right that wanted to teach creationism, that the world is,
Mhm.
5,000 years old, and um, all of that, or they think the Flintstones cartoon is actually a documentary that people lived with dinosaurs,
Yeah, I
which
know.
we know is not true.
Right.
So
Ah,
anyway,
the world
so
we live.
yeah, and the Supreme Court is trying to regain its footing. I mean, I
Mhm.
think they're trying hard, at least Roberts, maybe a couple of others, to try to find their footing against a lawless president. And it doesn't mean they're going to come together in the right way on major decisions the way we want it. But I think
Mhm.
they are thinking about what they can do as a body at this trying time to support the constitutional republic
I
in way,
agree. Yeah.
now some people might say cynically, and I agree with them, that that's because they went shopping already and they took everything off the shelves of things that mattered to them, and they wanted to accomplish for the Federalists, the Heritage Foundation, and the gun lobby, and the Bible lobby, and everything
Mhm.
else. So and the abortion lobby, and so all right, so now they're finally, well, we are the United States Supreme Court, but I think we're starting to see a little bit of that because, well,
Mhm.
if we aren't seeing it, and I think we are incrementally, I'd like to see it. I mean, the Congress at present is a doormat.
Right.
Constitution for Donald Trump is a
100%.
doormat.
Yeah.
Everything's a doormat. I'd
Mhm.
like to see, besides the lower federal courts, the
Mhm.
Supreme Court take a cue from the lower federal courts that they technically supervise and effing
Mhm.
step up, and for our constitutional
Mhm.
republic, or we won't have one. What's the
Mhm.
famous line by Dr. Ben Franklin when he was coming out of one of the big meetings about the formation of our government? And somebody said to him, Dr. Franklin, what is it? What are we? What is our form of government? And he said, a constitutional republic, if you can keep it. This
Mhm.
is what we're watching.
Yeah,
We're watching the struggle, the existential
absolutely.
struggle for whether we're going to be able, under this fascist assault by Donald Trump, if we're going to be able to keep the things that we hold dear, that matter to us. When you and I look at the American flag and say that we're American, we have a certain understanding of what that means.
Mhm.
And Donald Trump's working hard to try to change that and change that for the world.
Yes. No, so well said. I mean, absolutely. And you don't have to even like the justices. You don't have to agree with almost anything they've done. At the end of the day, they want their power. They want their
Yeah.
jobs. Congress, like you said, has been willing to give up their power, but they're not going to be so willing to give up their power. And maybe in a cynical way, people's desire to keep their own power might just save us from this democracy, because at the end of the day, that's what it's about. And the rest of it kind of goes away. They're not going to want Trump to have more power than them in a co-equal branch of government. They're just not.
See, that's the icing on the cake for this episode. And we're going to leave it at that. Until next week's episode of Unprecedented with Dina Sayegh. Dina also does some amazing hot take contributions during the week here and on the Midas Touch Network. Big part of the tent pole holding up things here on Legal AF is Dina Dahl. And take this moment here at the end, hit the subscribe button, take a receipt with you. We're trying to grow this pro-democracy channel. We need the subscribers. That's why I keep talking about it. I joked that it's like a PBS TV drive, except you don't get a tote bag.
Yeah.
Although I'm getting close to throwing one in at this rate.
Ooh,
we're doing it. I know, right? But we're doing like 70,000. We're adding 70,000 amazing subscribers every month at this rate. We're doing what we need to do, which allows me to bring on contributors like Dina Sayegh and Sidney Blumenthal and all the people from True Crime and stitch them together here and really have a great fellowship and community here. So I really appreciate all of you. So until our next report, I'm Michael Popok, joined by my friend and colleague, Dina Sayegh. In collaboration with the Midas Touch Network, we just launched the Legal AF YouTube channel. Help us build this pro-democracy channel where I'll be curating the top stories, the intersection of law and politics. Go to YouTube now and free subscribe at Legal AF MTN. That's at Legal AF MTN.